I built this slot mortiser back in 2009, and it relies on modified drawer slides like this as linear glides, but I think I messed those up recently. What I was trying to do is drill into end grain with a 1/2 inch router bit, and that requires too much force, which is applied here and then here, which puts a lot of twisting sort of thing on the top of it. So as I push in, you can see this moves to the side a bit. In fact, the whole top has got a little bit of wiggle on it like this now. Now that's not the most critical thing for a mortise because it just makes the mortise a bit wider this way, not in the thickness, but I gotta try to fix that. And it's been 17 years since I had this thing open, so let's see what it looks like inside now. So the slides are mounted between layers of plywood, and the only way to get at them is from the top by taking off these nuts. This part is pretty hard to put together. Taking it apart, probably not quite so bad. So the slides are mounted to the top with these screws and mounted to this part here, except this slide just came right up, and it looks like the nuts came off the end here. That could very much introduce some wiggle, so that's a problem. For 17 years, that's not very much debris inside of it, because I really can't get at it to clear it, but these rails and these rails here are designed to keep the dust away from these slides. Well, there's obviously some dust on here. So it seems to have worked fairly well. And next I have to take these nuts out to get this layer off, because that layer is mounted just like the previous one with the slides underneath. That's a surprisingly small amount of debris inside, although I did get a little bit here, I guess. And here's those nuts that have fallen off from the other drawer slide. Now this one's gotten a little bit loose, or at least the screws have gotten loose on it. This one here is still pretty tight, although it's kind of hard to move, so I should probably add more grease to that. Oh, not this way. Let's see, which way does this come out? Ah, this way. Oops! And the balls are coming out too. There we go. So wiping this one, that feels pretty dry and crusty. And I might have just cut myself on this one here. It's a sharp edge. I'm just going to wipe that with some oil on there. That'll help the rest of the grease come off. And same with this rail here. And now putting some fresh grease back on the slides. So the mounts for this rail are still very tight, and with a little bit of grease put on there, I can now put this back on. I put all the balls on this part here where they're captive, and now I'm just going to slide that on. I'm trying to push the balls along too as I'm putting it on there. Now I got the balls positioned again. It was a bit tough. I stuck a screwdriver in here to move the cage inside, and I just added this stop here. That prevents the balls from wandering out this way because the cage will hit this part, and on this part they can't come out this way because there's a bit of a hook on the end here, so that prevents them from coming out that way. So they'll always be kind of forced from either direction to stay roughly in the center and have a long run of these balls, and that gives me a lot of side-to-side stability against twisting. I'm not sure, but when I built this, I may have left this part a little bit loose because it's so hard to get these two perfectly aligned. And with this one providing all the stiffness, it's also longer, so it has more stiffness. This one just provides up and down guidance. This is the last one I'm doing. Just look at that slide. It's just, the grease is completely dried up. I guess grease is not meant to last that long. I forgot to put these screws in, so I had to take the whole thing off again to put these in, and it's more tricky with these screws because they keep getting caught and fall out like this. So I made these little wooden clips to hold the screws up, which makes it much easier. Except, of course, I hadn't thought of that until I did all 4 slides, so really too late. These drawer slides are just very tedious and finicky to mount, and much better in that regard is linear bearings as used on the panther rotor. But you look at that and it adds quite a lot of height, way more than the drawer slide, and you need 2 layers of that for the slot mortiser, so now you're way up to here, which makes the whole machine rather awkwardly tall. A lower profile solution would be to just use linear glides, but those are more expensive and they're also quite tricky to mount between layers of plywood. And though a bit easier, they're also worse because if you accidentally run them off the end, the balls fall out, and they're much harder to put in than it is for the drawer slides. And it's pretty difficult aligning that layer with all the screws going to their holes, especially because the holes are not at all oversized, because I didn't want there to be any wiggle that way. Oh right, those screws. I need to push those in. I just noticed those layers weren't fully together, so maybe if I just tap that down a bit. Some of the screws are coming up a little bit. So this screw on here was the hardest, but I've managed to slide the table over far enough now I can just get at it from the bottom, so it's much easier now. And now putting the top layer back on. Oops, backwards. Ha! That was way easier than the last layer. Still trying to lift this screw. I haven't had much luck with the magnet itself, but the magnet stuck to the screwdriver. Focused it in the magnetism enough, I can just pull it up. And now the tricky part is getting the nut on without pushing the screw back down. Maybe like this. Got it. So as tricky as this is to assemble, I remember this being much worse and having to do it several times when I originally built this machine, but I guess I had it debugged enough and maybe I remembered some lessons from 17 years ago. And it's back together, but I have a couple of screws left over. Whoops, but actually no worries because I realized I was missing them and I found more in my parts bin, and I finally found these screws again on the floor. So the machine isn't actually missing any screws right now. And with it pushed up against the workbench now so the cart doesn't move, if I try to apply torsion to this here, you can hardly see that move, so I think that fixed it. And I think the problem was just screws had gotten loose. The slides I didn't do anything to other than lubricate them. So this is a very finicky machine to put together, and it is to some extent just obsoleted by the panther rotor, but it's still one of my favorite machines because it's just very precise is very easy to adjust. I just have to adjust the stops for how wide I want the mortise to be, and the vertical adjustment is just this crank. And if I want to precisely space some mortises for a multiple mortise and tenon joint, this crank together with the counter make it really easy to hit those positions repeatedly, even if I want like 4 tenons right next to each other, which would be very difficult to make a template for the panther rotor. And if I haven't discouraged you enough from wanting to build one yourself, I do have a set of plans available on my website. But you need the right kind of drawer slides for this sort of thing. These double extending ones like this one won't do because they're just not precise enough. And if you just take the inside part of it, it's too difficult to mount. So you really need a single extension slide like this one, which is an old style keyboard drawer slide. And even those, you often have to modify them a little bit to tighten them up, although this one seems to be pretty tight to begin with. And why didn't I just use linear glides when I built the thing? Well, back in 2009, it was before you could get all this sort of stuff cheaply from China. So I went to a local bearing store and asked about buying linear glides, and they said, well, just give us your specifications and we'll write a quotation for you. I didn't bother with the quotation, I just figured out how to use drawer slides. And again, linear glides might be a bit better, but I think they just introduce different problems.